My name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about Jupiter entering the zodiac sign of Aries on May 10th. Jupiter, changing signs. That's always such an exciting thing. Everyone gets so happy when Jupiter changes signs, because that basically means that your luck is going to change. And with Jupiter entering the zodiac sign of Aries, what that means is that people born under the zodiac sign of Aries can look forward to a year of lucky days, as Jupiter, the planet of good fortune and higher purpose, rains its benefits and its blessings down on your sign for the next 365 days. Isn't that a good thing? Well, as you might imagine, that's not exactly how Jupiter works in astrology. Now, I'm not going to be a Saturnian downer. Jupiter is definitely the planet of benefits, rewards, and awards. And when it's traveling through your own zodiac sign, you can expect an influx of those things into your life. So Jupiter in Aries will benefit Aries for the time that it is there. It will also benefit the other two fire signs, Leo and Sagittarius, as well as the air signs, Gemini and Aquarius. A good time will be had by one and all if you happen to be born under these zodiac signs or have these zodiac signs on your ascendant or even a moon. Now, let's really unpack Jupiter and what it's about. As I said before, Jupiter is the sign of benevolence. It's benefic, just like Venus. And if you were up early in the morning, like I usually am, a couple of weeks ago, then you could see the conjunction between Venus and Jupiter in the sky just before sunrise. And it was a really splendid thing. I mean, those lights were both so bright in the sky. I mean, at first I thought it was headlights, or, well, obviously not headlights, but maybe an airplane or something like that. They were that bright and that recognizable. And then I realized, well, you know, I was getting up at about 5:40 in the morning. I realized, oh, that's Venus and Jupiter. They're conjunct. Wow, they're really next to each other. And wow, they're really bright. So Jupiter and Venus are the two benefics in astrology. And benefics are said to bring good things. And that is pretty much what they do. The other thing, though, that Jupiter is responsible for is morality. If you're going to talk about the idea of bringing good, then you also have to talk about the idea of evil or things that are bad. And if you're dealing with the notions of good and bad or good and evil, you're dealing with basically moral notions. These ideas that there are forces for good that are in conflict with forces that are evil and are bad. And this is very much something that is caught up in the planet Jupiter and the zodiac signs that it rules, which are Sagittarius and Pisces. Now, when we have Jupiter entering the zodiac sign of Aries, which is a fire sign, a lot of things come into mind. You know, there might be uptick in recklessness or rashness, heated tempers. People often warn about hubris, you know, being too big for your britches or thinking that you're invincible, these sorts of things. Jupiter is often equated with ideas of inflation or of inflation of ego, or getting too sure of yourself, or, you know, being so proud that you bring some sort of cosmic balance down upon you because you've become too proud as a person and you've committed hubris, which was basically that weird, strange moment that heroes in Greek mythology or certain mortals in Greek mythology would become all sorts of full of themselves and make these, you know, really stupid boasts that the gods could hear, and then the gods would rain upon them punishment. And that was done to really show them their place, because the gods are gods and mortals were just those, you know, little things that got underfoot. Okay, so this is where the notion of hubris comes from, and these are often associated with warnings of Jupiter going through your sign and things like that. And I guess that's interesting for as far as it goes, but honestly, I don't find it that interesting. Okay, so I'm going to skip to the things that I really want to talk about, with Jupiter in your sign. Jupiter brings benefit. Jupiter brings reward. Jupiter brings forth your life force. But more importantly than that, it brings forth your idea of good fortune and how good fortune acts in your life. A lot of our ideas of fortune, particularly good fortune, are connected to God. Okay, so Jupiter is a planet that really speaks to your understanding of divinity, of what is right and wrong, and how that operates in your life and how that operates in the world. The basic idea with Jupiter is that if you're rewarded with good things, then that must mean that what you're doing is good, quite frankly, okay, because people who do good are rewarded with good things. And if you are rewarded with bad things, if you're beset with setbacks or difficulties or challenges in your life, then that means you must have done something bad someplace or sometime in your life, and you're only getting what you deserve for being, a selfish person or a hubristic person, or, someone who just thought of themselves and not of other people and things like this. As you could imagine, that kind of a moral code is sort of bordering on the ridiculous, but it does come from the idea that good rewards good and bad is leveled upon people who are bad or evil or selfish. And the reason I sort of laugh at that, maybe a little too caustically, is because we all know stories of people, who have been less than stellar personalities, who haven't been particularly good, and have been rewarded in their lives and made great names and fames and money for themselves, and can be absolutely dreadful people, and everyone sort of waits for them to get their comeuppance, and they don't. Okay, so the universe isn't always even-handed in the way it doles out rewards and punishments. Nevertheless, that doesn't stop us from constructing an idea of how the universe should do it, and what justice is, and that it still ultimately is good to be good and not so good to be bad or to be evil. So Jupiter has this kind of moral point of view, and this is exactly what it brings to astrology. But what we have to remember with this moral point of view is that we have 12 signs of the zodiac, so we have 12 very different points of view on how morality and fortune should work in life and your own horoscope. Now, as I was saying earlier, Aries is the zodiac sign of the hero, and someone who is heroic. We expect things more than we would expect from ordinary other people. Ordinary other people we might expect to lie or to fib or to shoplift or slip something into the something like that, because that's just ordinary people, and ordinary people do that. But if you're an extraordinary person, okay, if you're someone who's been given great privilege, or who has a tremendous talent, or is a role model in some way in the community, then things are expected of you that are higher than for other people. This is something that the fire signs very much understand. And by the fire signs, I mean Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. They understand that it is their responsibility to be a better person, okay, or to show up as a role model for other people in their lives. There's always a feeling of performance or being on or in the public eye when you're born under an element like fire, and the expectation is that you rise to your best self. This is something that all three fire signs really espouse. Also, what you have happen or occur with the fire signs is this idea that of individuality. That individuality is a very important thing. In fact, for the fire signs, showing up as your best self or your authentic self or your true self, this is what you do. This is what's expected of you. And the more that you live according to who you are as a person, the more that you will be held up as a role model for other people. Now, there are three different ideas of who you are if you're born under a fire sign. For Leo, everything comes from the heart. Okay, I am sincere. I am an honest. I am a noble person, and I have a very strong paternal bent. Okay, it's sort of fatherly bent, and that's because Leo is the zodiac sign of the good father. So you're expected to be like a benevolent parent. Okay, when you're a Leo, and this is what Leos see for themselves when they think of themselves as a role model. They take this very, very seriously. With Sagittarius, it is I am living a higher purpose directed life. I'm living according to my higher purpose. And for Sagittarians, they believe that once you connect to the higher purpose or the purpose, the meaning of your life, then it's like a wind that has filled your sails, and it will speed your craft to whatever destination that you choose to go. So for Sagittarius, the idea of living according to a higher purpose, and that this higher purpose inspires you, and you in turn inspire others to lift their sights, this is very much a Sagittarian idea. With Aries, it's the hero. Okay. And the hero is the person who comes to the rescue. The hero is the person who saves the day. And as I was saying earlier, the hero is the one who's expected to be better than most people, because a hero has been bestowed with strength. A hero has been given a mission in life. A hero has outstanding wits. You know, there's some sort of like talent or skill or an ability that a hero has that makes them better than the typical person. And so they stand out from everyone else. But the idea isn't to stand out from everyone else and bask in your own glory. The idea is to live according to a higher standard, maybe a code of ethics. I mean, this is what we see show up in Mars-ruled activities like the military or sports, you know, and we talked about achieving a standard of excellence a couple of podcasts ago, and this is something that Aries takes really quite seriously. But it's not just trophies on the shelf, you know, it's that if you have shown yourself to be outstanding in some way, then you're challenge in life is to be an outstanding person. Okay, but an outstanding person from an Aries point of view isn't just, you know, fame and glory. An outstanding person from an Aries point of view is someone for other people to look up to. You know, it's the person who rescues someone from the plight. It's the person who talks someone down off the ledge. It's the person who races into a burning building to save the baby. It's the person, you know, the friend, the loved one who's there for you in your darkest hour. Okay, so this idea of being a hero, of saving people from disaster, or of saving people from themselves, this is something which is very much wrapped up in the zodiac sign of Mars. In the zodiac sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars. And Mars is a planet that shows up in things like emergency service workers, you know, people who are driving those ambulances, resuscitating those bodies, coming to the rescue. Okay, and it's supposed to be something that's also associated to the armed forces and to the police, anyone who kind of like stands against the chaos of disorder and the darkness of villainy, and protects those who have been put under their sponsorship, or have been put, who are their responsibility. You know, in Aries, I am here to protect those whom I am responsible for. And this is something that an Aries takes very, very seriously. But what I wanted to sort of illustrate, you know, how this idea of good and bad, the notion of the moral universe, Jupiter entering the zodiac sign of Aries. Aries is the zodiac sign of the hero, you know, the person who is given a special something that makes them better than the rest, and so greater things are expected or demanded of them. You know, what might be a sort of example of this, or what might we work with to sort of illustrate this idea? So I thought long and hard, and I came up with the story of Spiderman, particularly the origin of Spiderman. Now, Spiderman, as I'm sure many, if not all of you know, is a superhero who is endowed with the powers of a spider. So it gives him great strength, it gives him great agility, and he shoots webbing out of his wrists and swings from building to building in Manhattan, kind of like Tarzan grasping for another vine as he makes his way through the jungle. But when I was a kid, okay, when I was, about 12 or something like that, I discovered comic books for the first time, okay? And it was really a wonderful time to discover comic books. There were no big movies, no big franchises, no big, whatever. It was just a simple comic book that you found on a spit around rack in the local drugstore. In my case, it was Aries Pharmacy. And I remember going down every Tuesday and sort of like going through all the different comic books and picking them out at 20 cents a piece, And I remember when there was a price bump to 25 cents, and I was really afraid that I was going to have to like cut down my list. Anyway, one of the comic books that I found most appealing, of course, was Spider-Man. And Spider-Man actually has his first appearance in the year 1962. And it's actually a great time for Spider-Man to have debuted. Spider-Man's first appearance wasn't in his own comic book, The Amazing Spider-Man. That's what he had by the time I was collecting comics. No, Spider-Man's first appearance was in this loser Marvel title. I mean, it was like an awful comic book. It's, in fact, the previous issues that come before Spider-Man's appearance sell for nothing because like it was so bad. It was such a bad comic book. Okay, and the comic book was originally called Amazing Adventures. Okay, and then by maybe about book 3 or 5 or something like that, maybe 10, they changed it to Amazing Adult Fantasy, like giving it a kind of questionable sound. Amazing Adult Fantasy. What exactly is that supposed to be? And where it promised, we will not insult the reader's intelligence, with the fantasy stories that you read within. Basically, this was a glorified monster comic book from month to month. And, it featured things like Monsteroso and Tor and the Terror. What is it? The Terror of Timbu Ba. Okay, Timbu Ba, like what the hell is that supposed to be? Sorry, excuse my French. And finally, Serpo, the creature that crushed the world. I mean, like they were like these really cheesy monster stories, every month in what began as Amazing Adventures, and then it was called Amazing Adult Fantasy, and finally the last and final issue, number 15, which was renamed Amazing Fantasy. They were still trying to come up with a winning name for this loser comic book. So in number 15 of Amazing Fantasy, which also happened to be the last copy of the run, it got canceled right after issue number 15 of Amazing Fantasy. Well, in issue number 15 of Amazing Fantasy, it told the story of this kid named Peter Parker. Peter Parker, and the artist, Spider-Man was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Stan Lee had great lines. He wrote terrific scripts, all of them really cheesy, and like a dime a dozen, whatever he could, type out that particular week. Okay. But the real genius here was the artistry of Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko did all of these monsters like Tor and Timbu Ba. I have to even look at my notes to remember Timbu Ba, the Terror of Timbu Ba. Okay, he would do all these monster stories dutifully, but Steve Ditko created Peter Parker, and he created the costume for Spider-Man, which pretty much is the same one that he wore in his first issue. So the story of Peter Parker was a story of a scrawny high school kid in Queens who was the class geek. He had glasses and he, went to science class and things like that. And all the kids at the high school made fun of him. There's even a panel where he asks a girl out on a date and she's like, oh, leave me alone. You bookworm. I mean, that was like the 1962 version of geek. Leave me alone, you bookworm. You're not snazzy enough like Flash Thompson. So Flash Thompson was the school jock, and things like this. And he walks by and all the girls ooh and ah, over Flash Thompson. So if the idea of Peter Parker asking you out on a date was like cooties, it was like, ew, gross, get that away from me, Peter Parker. And so he had these glasses and he was like this this reed thin kid. I mean, this is the beauty of Steve Ditko's art from 1962. He's like this reed thin kid who's wearing, a vest. I mean, it kind of looks like Charlie Brown in a way, but he's thin and geeky looking. And so he's like, really in love with his telescope or science class. And of course, he goes to science class where the teachers really think he's great. And Peter also is being raised, interestingly, not by his parents, and that's never explained. Peter is being raised by his Uncle Ben and his Aunt May, who own a modest little house in Queens, New York. And this was the other wonderful thing about Marvel Comics. They situated it in a real place. Queens, New York, okay? Everything I learned about New York, okay, at first I learned at the age of 12 or 13 reading Marvel Comics, because these heroes, they didn't live in a Gotham City or a Metropolis or Paradise Island or something like that. Peter Parker was in Queens, New York with his Uncle Ben, who obviously, was some sort of like middle-class guy, and he was older, and his Aunt May, who was also older, and no parents to speak of. But Uncle Ben and Aunt May loved and adored Peter, okay, as if he were their own kid. And so, and they spoiled him with like, an extra pancake or something like that on Sundays, or a textbook to help with his scientific studies. So Peter is living a wretched life at school where he's being bullied and made fun of constantly. I mean, everyone's like, oh, that wallflower, Peter Parker, but he comes home to his beloved Uncle Ben and Aunt May, and they just make him feel like the biggest prince on the planet. So one day, Peter's attending some science experiment, and this is 1962. So you have to remember that, all the rage in comics and films and things like that, from the later 50s into the early 60s is science fiction. So everything is atomic energy and monsters and what man has done wrong to incur the wrath of nature, sort of things. And there were, rocket ships and spaceships, and Sputnik had just gone up, and we were involved in a Cold War with Russia, and there was a space race that was going on. Who was going to make it to the moon first, United States or Russia, and all these sorts of things. So it's the early 60s, and there's spies, and there's conspiracies, and there's people hiding behind every corner, and at any point you never knew. And this was a very real fear, still is. You never knew who was going to set off a nuclear bomb and maybe end the world or something like that. So this is the 1960s, but here we are in modest Queens, New York. And so Peter goes to a scientific experiment, with these like scientists, and they're always kind of like old doddering men, and they, like they're doing an experiment with radioactivity. Okay. And so I don't even know what they're doing with radioactivity. I don't even think Stan Lee, who wrote the comic book, knew what they were doing with radioactivity, but some sort of experiment with radioactivity. And why was radioactivity being experimented on in Queens, New York, like unsupervised? Anyway, they're doing an experiment with radioactivity. And while they're, zapping things or whatever, and Peter's in the audience, like with, like 3 other people, and his glasses are reflecting the radioactive, pulsations. Unbeknownst to everyone, this spider, lowers down on a web, and it gets between the radioactive particles that are being zapped or something like that. And so the spider's zapped and it turns red, of course, which red is the color of Mars. Okay, it turns red and it falls upon Peter's hand, and it bites Peter in its last, they even say in its last gasp of breath. This radioactive infused spider bites Peter in its last gasp of breath. And so Peter immediately is like, whoa, he's like, ow, that hurt. And he looks down and he sees that his hand is not only swelling up very quickly with the spider bite, but it's glowing. And he's like, what's going on? And then he quickly leaves. And even the scientists, they're just as bad as his high school friends, friends. With friends like that, who needs enemies? They're just as bad as his high school peers. They're like, oh, looks like that scientific nerd Peter Parker doesn't even have the stomach to sit through and watch a radioactive experiment. I mean, they're just awful, these people. And so Peter goes staggering home. And he's kind of like dizzy, and he's got this pulsating hand, and he goes upstairs in his bedroom, and Aunt May calls after him, asking him if he wants some milk and crackers or something. He's like, I'm fine. And she's like, are you sure? And he's like, oh yeah, no, I am. And he goes to his bedroom, and he falls on his bed, and he's dizzy. He's just like, he's dizzy. This bite does it hurt? Does it itch? No, it's just this burning sensation, and he feels literally infected, and he doesn't know what to do, and he starts to get sweaty, and he starts to get really, really uncomfortable. And so he thinks, okay, let's go outside and maybe clear my head. And so he goes outside and comes racing down the street, this car, right at him, and he's like, he's shocked looking at this car, and he automatically jumps out of the way of the car. And in the comic book, they're like, oh, serves that kid right for like being in a daze or whatever. We're speeding along, and that's what we get to do. And that kid should get out of the way, or something like that. I mean, it's such a mean-spirited world that this poor boy lives in. But he jumps out of the way, and he leaps up like about 15 feet onto the side of a building where his hands stick to the bricks of this building. And there's this moment where he's looking at his hands, which are sticking to the side of this building, and he's looking down at the street and the car that's speeding away, and he's beginning to realize this is his we're not in Kansas anymore Toto moment, okay? It's like, what is going on here? So what he does is that he climbs down from where he's leapt up onto the side of the building, and he realizes he can climb. So he climbs up, and he climbs down, and he climbs up, and he climbs down, and he kicks off his shoes. I don't know what possesses him to do this, but he kicks off his shoes and starts climbing up these buildings and along these wires and things like that. And he begins to deduce very quickly that he's like a spider, that he has the characteristics of a spider, that when he thinks he's going to slip off the side of the building, he reaches out for a pipe, and he grabs it. But what happens is that he squeezes the pipe as if it were paper. Okay. And he realizes that he's got this tremendous strength. So he's got this strength and resilience, and he can climb up and down buildings and things like this. And he realizes something special has happened to him indeed. And this is a Jupiter moment, okay? It's that we think of Jupiter often in terms of like blessings or rewards, like, maybe winning the lottery or the jackpot or something like this. But Jupiter can also be these moments of discovery of our abilities. They can be moments of discovery of our talents. No, we're not going to be bitten by a radioactive spider, and I wouldn't recommend it. But it can certainly be an understanding or realization that you're better at something that you thought you were, or that there's this ability that you have, which is actually stronger and bigger and better than you thought it was. So sometimes Jupiter can be the introduction of an opportunity into your life, but oftentimes it can be the introduction of a strange, what they used to call twist of fate, or stroke of fortune, where you realize that you possess something that you've always possessed, but you never thought of it in that way before, or you realize that the world has changed in such a way that it is now full of opportunity, rather than being a place, rather than being a battleground or a place where you're made to feel discouraged or dismayed, okay? In the instance of this comic, which is basically a modern day fairy tale, he realizes that he has this ability. So what's the first thing he thinks of? Well, he climbs down off the building, and he walks past a poster that says, Russell Marco, and if you can stay in the ring with Marco for 5 minutes, you will get $100. So so Russell Marco, stay in the ring 5 minutes and get $100. So his first thinking is like, let's make some money. Okay, so he goes running on home, and Aunt May is like, are you still interested in milk and crackers? And Peter's like, no, 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 I'm fine. I'm fine. I was worried. You sounded a little, weaker before. I'm fine, Aunt May. I'm fine. And he goes running onto his room and he's like, holding the poster. He's like, I'm going to wrestle Marco and make $100. Okay. Which is like what most people think of when opportunity like Jupiter comes into their lives. It's like, what's the immediate financial gain, or what can I get out of this? Okay, so it's a typical human reaction. And he's a high school kid. Okay, so he goes and he grabs the laundry hamper and he takes out an old white t-shirt and some baggy jeans, and he wraps some like an old shirt around his head or whatever, and cuts out 2 holes so he can see, because he figures he's going to go wrestle Marco and make his $100, but he doesn't want to reveal who he is to the world. He's like this, nerdy kid in high school, and they would laugh at him, and maybe he wouldn't be able to collect his $100. So he goes, and Marco's there, and kind of like bikini swimsuit or whatever, looking all bustly or whatever, and everyone's like, oh, Marco, and it's like, it's Queens, it's 1962, so it's a bunch of guys with cigars and hats and things like that. And they're like, oh, Marco, and they're like, okay, now introducing mystery wrestler dude guy, and so Peter Parker jumps on in, and everyone's laughing because he's slender little coat hanger kid. He's built like a coat hanger, type of thing. And so he gets into the ring with Marco, and Marco, it's actually kind of like, costume wrestling before costume wrestling became a big deal, and so Peter's got his like little costume on, his and so Marco's like, and Peter's able to dodge out of his way or whatever. And finally, at the just before the end of the 5 minutes, he grabs Marco, who's this huge, like Marco's got to be like 250, 260 pounds. And, he grabs Marco and he throws Marco over his shoulder, and he climbs up a pole with Marco and holds him over the audience, and everyone's like, oh, and Marco's like, put me down, kid, put me down. What did I ever do to you? So Peter comes down and he puts Marco down and wins his $100. And then there's this guy in the audience who's like, that kid's got talent. I'm gonna book him on the Ed Sullivan Show and make lots of money. So he shows up, he comes up to Peter and he's like, hey, how'd you like to go on the Ed Sullivan Show and make lots of money? And Peter's like, how much? And he's like, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, more than you made today. And Peter's like, all right, and he's like, and you know what? Keep that, what is that? An old shirt or something like that wrapped around your head? Like, keep that mask on because it's a great gimmick, and people love that. And he's like, sure, I'll go ahead and do that, So he gives Peter his card, and Peter goes on home, feeling like $1 million. He's hit the jackpot. He's going places. Okay, so what Peter does is show off extraordinary fashion talent. He's able to sew together a spider suit. It's a costume. It's what we all identify with as Spider-Man. He puts this together, and he even comes up with cartridges that can shoot webbing, which he describes as a kind of super glue, and he can shoot it up to the ceiling of his room and hang and swing on it and things like this, and he's going to do that too, and he's going to go on the Ed Sullivan Show. So Peter goes on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he's a big hit, and he does different TV appearances and things like this, but he's known as Spider-Man. He calls himself Spider-Man, and so he's on the cover of Life magazine. He's doing TV specials. He's doing all these sorts of things. I mean, the world is full and cannot get enough of this mysterious Spider-Man, and so he's raking in the cash. He's like, hey, look at all this money I made. Peter's like a bookie. Okay, he's raking in the cash and making all this money. And so one night, maybe it's another appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show or one of those New York, television shows that were really, really popular in the 1960s. One night, he's doing his performance, which is basically climbing up and down walls and swinging and making everyone go, ooh, odd, how can this person do this? One night he's doing this, and he, climbs back on down, and his producer is like, hey, kid, you did good. And he gives him a whole bunch of, another wad of cash. And so Peter's like walking out of the TV studio, and he's heading towards the elevator on his way home. And while he's walking there, he hears this fellow cry out, stop him, that's a thief, stop him, and evidently someone was going through the dressing rooms of the different celebrities and picking their wallets and purses and things like that. It's a burglar. It's a hood. Okay. And he's running down the hallway, and Peter's like, standing there in his Spider-Man outfit, and he watches as the guy runs right on past him and into an open elevator, and takes the elevator, and it speeds down, and he escapes onto the street below. And the cop stops, and he turns to, Peter, who's dressed as Spider-Man. He's like, why didn't you stop him? He was right there. All you had to do was put out your leg and trip him, or hold him up, or maybe even, race to the elevators and close it or something like that. Why didn't you stop him? And Peter's looking at his money. He's like, why? It's not my problem. It's your problem, dude. You stop him, and the cop's like, thanks, no thanks. And Peter's like, whatever, and so he goes home, and he doesn't think anything of it. And he doesn't think anything of it until he gets home that night. He's taken off his Spider-Man outfit, and he's put on his regular clothes, which is usually a vest and a white shirt and jeans, and he gets on home, and there are police cars that are surrounding his house in Queens. And he goes up and he asks what the ruckus is, and the cops are saying, listen, this is a crime zone. Don't cross the tape. You're not allowed in. And it's like, well, what happened? And he's like, there was an old fellow who surprised a burglar in the house, and he was shot, and he's died. And so, and Peter's like, immediately, like, you have to let me through. You have to let me through. I know that man. This is my house. And so he goes running on through, and he discovers that it's his Uncle Ben who's been shot and who has been killed. And much to his horror, Peter, just days before had been given a microscope by Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And there's a moment where, he says, you're the greatest family a fella ever had. But in his thought balloon, and I wanted to sort of underscore this, in his thought balloon, he says, they're the only ones who've ever been kind to me. He's talking about Uncle Ben and Aunt May. They're the only ones who have ever been kind to me. I'll see to it that they're always happy, but the rest of the world could go hang for all I care. So he says to himself, I'll see to it that they're happy. They've always been good to me, but the rest of the world can go hang for all I care. Okay, so there's no interest whatsoever outside of his family and putting on his little spider costume and making lots of money with these TV appearances. So he hears on the cop radio that the burglar, the suspect of this shooting, is holed up in Acme Warehouse. Okay, like, it's always Acme Warehouse. If you've ever watched Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, it's like Acme is like the name of all the inventions and things like this. I guess it was a standard 60s generic title of something. So it's like, the burglar is holed up in Acme Warehouse, and Peter, swings on his spider web, like Tarzan swing. Somehow, I guess Queens suddenly had like skyscrapers or something. I don't know. But anyway, he swings on his spider web on lampposts maybe, and makes his way to Acme Warehouse. And he gets there before the cops do, or actually, he gets there, the cops have surrounded the building, but he climbs up the building and goes into the warehouse to confront the man who's killed his beloved uncle. And so they have a fight. He shoots his web, and the gun falls out of the burglar's hand, and he hits the burglar, and the burglar falls down. And it's in that moment, and this is an iconic moment, he picks up the burglar, and it's the only moment, if you remember the Spider-Man eyes, they're white, and they're kind of like, they go up like this. In that moment in the Steve Ditko comic, and it's so brilliant, you see like 2 dots in the eyes, to show amazement. And in that moment, when he picks up the burglar and he looks down at him, he sees the man who had run past him at the CBS TV studios or wherever he had been filming, and he recognizes this man. He's the burglar that he could have stopped, that the policeman asked, why didn't you just stop him? All you had to do was trip him or whatever, I would have caught up. And he said, what's it to me? All I care about is me and my own, and the rest of the world can go hang themselves for all I care, And it's come back, it's come full circle, so that he recognizes that the man who killed his beloved uncle is the same one he could have stopped as he was racing from the crime scene earlier. And so he lowers the burglar on webbing, and the police are like, they've never seen it before. And then in the last couple of panels, there's one where he's holding his head and he's crying. There's tears coming down, and he says, my fault. If only I had stopped him when I could have, but I didn't. And now my Uncle Ben is dead. So he's crying, he's weeping at himself having not done this. And then the last panel is him walking home in his Spiderman suit, and it's just his head is hung low, and you see him from behind. And it says, and a lean, silent figure slowly fades into the gathering darkness, aware at last that in this world, with great power comes great responsibility. And that's the end of the story. That in this world, with great power comes great responsibility. And that's become kind of a Marvel maxim over the years. It's said in lots of comics and TV shows and movies and things like that. With great power comes great responsibility. And I love this because that's a good message, and I really, really like it. But what I love about this is that it's a tale with a moral at the end of it, which is very much Jupiter. Okay. We have this tale in which we see Jupiter play out. This boy gets these amazing powers, which bring amazing opportunities, and he works it. I mean, he's an enterprising kid. I mean, he works it. He makes a lot of money with his TV appearances and things like that. Things that we see with people on YouTube and their TV spots and whatever. It's like what a lot of young people do these days, and older people too. But he's got his 15 minutes of fame, a la Andy Warhol, and he makes the most of it. He's an enterprising kid. He makes a lot of money. But in this opportunity, this wealth of opportunity, there's a greater opportunity that appears, and it's the opportunity to do the right thing. It's the opportunity to do something good. And he shirks it. He doesn't. He lets the burglar run past. And then that circles back and becomes the killer of his beloved Uncle Ben and the destroyer of the family. From then on, it's Aunt May and Peter, and that's it. And so it's the realization that he could have done something, but he didn't. That's the thing that plagues him. That's the thing that becomes, the guilt trip, and for some of us, that might be like the guilt trip, the guilty thing, the moment that I will always regret. But in the case of Peter, because he's a hero, it becomes the thing that drives him forward in his superhero career. It's the fact that he had a chance to do something and he didn't, and he paid for it. So in true Aries fashion, in true fire sign fashion, he's going to show up in the lives of other people, and he's going to make a difference. This is what the fire signs are all about. I make a personal difference in other people's lives. So fire signs have two parts to their kind of life mission: show up and make a personal difference. So fire signs know that a lot might be riding on their decision, on their judgment, on what they say is okay, on what they say is not okay, and where other signs might really debate, am I the right person to make that decision? Should I make the decision? What are the options and variables? Fire signs are like, this is the moment. I'm going to seize the day in a carpe diem sort of way, or I'm going to seize the moment in a here and now grab, and I'm going to make a personal difference. And this is the thing that goes on to propel Peter in his career as Spider-Man, but it's also, relating it back to our own lives. It's about, how do you show up and make the personal difference that affects and impacts other people's lives? This is the thing that I really want you to think about during the time that Jupiter is in Aries. You will have a blessing, you will have a reward, you will have a recognition, you will have a chance to meet, maybe even make money and fame and fortune, And Jupiter is about those things. Marsilio Ficino goes on about Jupiter being about those things. And that was part of Marsilio Ficino, the founder of the Florentine Academy. That was part of his critique of Jupiter, that people who had very strong Jupiter in their lives were too concerned with fame and fortune and worldly riches, that they didn't have the conscience. They didn't have the reflection to go along with that. And so what we have with a Jupiter in Aries is kind of a conscientious objector, okay? It's the hero who stands up to whatever occasion. And so you may feel that you are given a benefit and given something good, but then you will also be challenged by Jupiter. Jupiter challenges and tests just as much as Saturn does, and we can get into that another time. But you will be challenged by Jupiter for the good that you get, okay? And the challenge with Jupiter is a very simple one. Are you good enough for the good? Will the good get you to do good, or will it get you to hold on to what you have and to guard what you have jealously, Or so the maxim with Jupiter is always pay it forward. Good begets good. If a good turn is done to you, you turn around and you do a good turn for someone else, and you don't wait for a reward. It's like Spiderman. He saves the day and leaves. No one can reward him or give him money. He never takes money for what he does. He always leaves a note saying, your friendly neighborhood Spiderman, as he, catches the crook who snatched the purse or defeats the villain who imperiled the city block. But the thing is, it's always about this idea of paying it forward. A good turn is done for you, so you do a good turn for someone else. It sounds simple enough, and it may be. But for most of you who are dealing with Jupiter in Aries, which is going to be this blessing, but also this heroic challenge to show up for someone else, there's going to be a quandary connected to it. Jupiter loves quandaries, moral quandaries. Okay, Jupiter just loves moral quandaries, because moral quandaries, more than reward or a pat on the head or a lottery ticket, moral quandaries get us to question. They get us to question what is good and what is bad. They get us to question, are only the good rewarded, which can actually be very chauvinistic, or very sort of only good people get good things and bad people must have done bad things to bring about what they've done, which can get into some very slippery ground in terms of moral judgments and understandings of other people, sort of conveniently getting rid of the restrictions or the limitations or the fact that people can suffer a spate of bad luck, and instead of deriding them for it, maybe could use some support and a helping hand. Anyway, Jupiter will also present with this opportunity that you receive, this good turn of events in your life, or moral quandary. Are you only looking out for yourself, or are you passing it on to others? And this will be the great question. This will be the great challenge for those fire signs who will be enjoying Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Aries. And it will be the great question and the great challenge for those air signs, Gemini and Aquarius, who will also be benefiting. Are you looking after your own good? Or, are you finding a way for your good to benefit you as well as the lives of other people around you? So these are the benefits, and these are the questions that you will be wrestling with during Jupiter's tenure in Aries. Jupiter will be in Aries from May 10th to October 27th. So Jupiter will be in Aries from May 10th to October 27th. Bear in mind that on July 28th, it turns retrograde. But the first leg of Jupiter's tenure in Aries is May 10th to October 27th. On October 27th, it retrogrades out of Aries back into the zodiac sign of Pisces. And then it re-enters Aries on December 21st to May 17th. So those are the dates when Jupiter will be in the zodiac sign of Aries. And those are the dates in which your conscience and your conscientiousness will be raised.
If there's one aspect of astrology that really grabs our imagination, it's this idea that you can tell the future by looking at a piece of paper. Master astrologer Rick Levine recently made this observation, and while the idea is compelling, is it actually true? You'll find out in Rick's course on timing and transits. Learn what astrology can help you predict and how to do it by going to astrologyhub.com/transits.